The emergency klaxons aboard Harmony Prime hadn't stopped wailing for 3 days straight, which meant Chairman Vextar's left eye tentacle had been twitching for exactly the same amount of time. The space station's conference room, normally reserved for discussing things like trade disputes and the proper pronunciation of unpronounceable alien names, now housed the most desperate gathering in galactic medical history. "Gentle beings," Vextar announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never actually practiced medicine, but had 3 degrees in medical administration. "We are officially out of options that don't involve complete humiliation." Chief Medical Officer Quindal, a being who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a filing cabinet, that consulted her datapad with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own death warrant. "The Zeltharian Medical Corps has failed. The Andromedian Healing Collective has failed. Even the crystalline surgeons of Vega Prime have thrown up their manipulator appendages in defeat." Around the conference table, representatives from 17 different species sat in various states of despair. The Corellian delegate was literally dissolving from stress, leaving small puddles on the floor that maintenance would have to deal with later. "The plague has now spread to 47 colonies across 3 star systems," Quindal continued, her voice getting more monotone with each horrifying statistic. "Mortality rate is approaching 93%. Our best xenobiologists can't even identify what we're dealing with. It's like nothing in our databases." Vextar's other eye tentacle started twitching. "And the symptoms? Complete systemic failure. Patients present with cellular breakdown, neural degradation, and what can only be described as their bodies forgetting how to be alive. Our medical scanners show nothing. Our treatments do nothing. Our prayers to various deities have been notably ineffective." The room fell silent except for the sound of the Corellian delegate continuing to dissolve and someone's translator struggling with what might have been sobbing or possibly an allergic reaction. Finally, Ambassador Theta Nix from the Centauri Collective raised a trembling appendage. "There is one option we haven't discussed." The entire room turned to look at the ambassador, whose species was known for their conservative approach to everything, including breathing. "The humans," Theta Nix whispered, as if saying the word too loudly might summon one. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop, if anyone in the room had known what a pin was, or why dropping it would be significant. "The Deathworlders?" Vextar's voice climbed several octaves. "Are you suggesting we ask those barbaric primates for medical assistance? They're barely civilized enough to operate spacecraft without crashing into things." "They are the only major species we haven't consulted," Theta Nix pointed out with the desperate logic of someone who'd run out of rational options. "And there are rumors about their medical practices." "Yes, horrifying rumors," interjected Dr. Kepler-Tun, whose species prided themselves on never having experienced a single day of illness in their recorded history. "They actually touch their patients with their appendages, without protective barriers. They cut people open on purpose," added another delegate, shuddering visibly. "And they use chemical compounds that would be considered toxic waste on any civilized world," Quindal added, though her voice carried a note of desperate curiosity. Vextar stood up, his official robes rustling with the weight of impending bureaucratic nightmare. "The Galactic Medical Council has standards. We have protocols. We have dignity. We don't just call up random Deathworlders and ask them to solve our problems." "We have 47 dying colonies," Theta Nix replied quietly. The room fell silent again. In the distance, the emergency klaxons continued their monotonous warning that everything was very much not okay. "Fine," Vextar said finally, his eye tentacles now twitching in stereo. "Contact the humans. But I want it on record that this is a last resort, and when this inevitably goes wrong, I blamed everyone except myself." As the meeting dissolved into the usual chaos of interspecies bureaucracy, no one in that room could have imagined they were about to unleash the most stubborn, sarcastic, and surprisingly effective medical practitioner the galaxy had ever seen. 3,000 light-years away, on an asteroid that had been optimistically named Nugget 7, despite containing nothing more valuable than iron or ore and regret, Dr. Mac Sullivan was having the kind of day that made him question his life choices. Again. "Doc, my arm's bent the wrong way," announced Crusher Jenkins, a miner whose nickname was apparently aspirational rather than descriptive, given that he was the one who usually ended up crushed. Mac looked up from his coffee, which was strong enough to strip paint and possibly the only thing keeping him from catching the next transport back to Earth. "Well, Crusher, that's what we in the medical profession call a problem. Can you fix it?" Mac examined the arm, which was indeed bent in a direction that human arms were not designed to bend. "I can fix it, but it's going to hurt. And I'm fresh out of the good painkillers." "What have you got?" Mac reached into his medical bag and pulled out a bottle of what was generously labeled as whiskey. "I've got this, some duct tape, and a prayer to whatever deity handles mining accidents." 20 minutes later, Crusher's arm was back in working order, held together with enough duct tape to secure a small spacecraft and numbed with enough whiskey to float one. "Doc, you're a miracle worker," Crusher declared, admiring his silver-wrapped appendage. "I'm a guy with basic medical training and access to Earth's two greatest inventions," Mac replied, cleaning his hands with sanitizer that smelled suspiciously like the whiskey. "Though I suppose miracles are relative out here in the armpit of the galaxy." That's when the hologram flickered to life in the middle of his makeshift clinic, causing several miners to dive for cover and one to spill his beer. The blue-tinted figure of Chairman Vextar appeared, looking as comfortable as someone who'd never had to explain why he was calling a human for help. "Dr. Sullivan, I presume?" Mac leaned back in his chair, taking in the sight of an alien bureaucrat materializing in his asteroid clinic like some kind of cosmic wrong number. "Depends who's asking and whether they're here to pay my outstanding medical school loans. I am Chairman Vextar of the Galactic Medical Council, and we have a proposition for you. If it involves more forms to fill out, I'm not interested. I came out here specifically to avoid paperwork." Vextar's eye tentacles twitched. "We have a medical crisis of unprecedented proportions. Our best medical minds have failed to find a solution. We need your help." Mac nearly choked on his coffee. "You want help? From me? The human who's currently holding together a mining operation with duct tape and optimism? Yes, well, desperate times and all that." "Let me get this straight," Mac said, standing up and beginning to pace around his small clinic. "You've got a whole galaxy full of advanced alien civilizations, medical technology I can barely pronounce, and species that have probably been practicing medicines before humans figured out fire. And now you want help from a Deathworlder? The situation is rather urgent." Mac pulled up a chair and sat down directly in front of the hologram. "Okay, I'm interested. But I have conditions. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation. I don't want money. I want a fully equipped medical facility, access to any resources I need, and complete immunity from whatever bureaucratic nonsense you people call standard procedure." Vextar's tentacles stopped twitching. "That's highly irregular. So is calling a human for medical advice, but here we are." The hologram flickered as Vextar presumably consulted with his colleagues. When it stabilized, he looked even more uncomfortable than before. "Very well. Your terms are acceptable. And I want to see the patients. All of them. Not just reports or scans, but actual face-to-face contact. That's barbaric. That's medicine. Take it or leave it." Another flicker. Another consultation. When Vextar returned, he looked like someone who'd just agreed to let a wild animal perform surgery. "Agreed. A medical vessel will arrive to transport you within the cycle." The hologram cut out, leaving Mac alone with a clinic full of miners who were staring at him like he'd just agreed to wrestle a black hole. "Well," Mac said, finishing his coffee and starting to pack his medical bag, "looks like I'm going to make some new friends." 3 hours later, the medical vessel Serenity's Grace docked with Nugget 7, its pristine white hull making the asteroid look even more like a cosmic garbage dump. As Mac boarded the ship, he couldn't help but notice that everything was so clean it practically glowed. "This is either going to be the adventure of a lifetime," he muttered to himself, "or the stupidest decision I've ever made." Given his track record, It was probably both. The medical facility on Zolonia Prime was the kind of place that made Mac immediately want to check his boots for mud he was pretty sure he didn't have. Everything was white, sterile, and humming with the kind of technology that probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP. Dr. Sullivan, announced a tall, angular alien who moved with the precise efficiency of someone who'd never had an unplanned moment in their life. I am Dr. Kethra, Chief of Medical Operations. We have prepared quarters for you in the visiting physician's wing. Mac looked around the reception area, which was large enough to land a shuttle and decorated with what appeared to be abstract art but might have been alien medical equipment. Nice place. Very clean. Almost aggressively clean. We maintain the highest standards of sterility, Dr. Kethra said, completely missing the sarcasm. Contamination protocols are strictly observed. Right. And where are the patients? Dr. Kethra paused, clearly not expecting such a direct question. The patients are in the isolation wing. We'll begin with a comprehensive briefing of their cases, review of all medical scans, analysis of treatment protocols, and a thorough examination of our data. Or, Mac suggested, we could go look at the patients. A small, nervous-looking alien who resembled a cross between a chipmunk and a computer terminal scurried up to them. Dr. Sullivan? I'm Dr. Nimbo, Head of Research. We've prepared extensive files on each case, 17 different scanning modalities, complete genetic mapping, cellular analysis down to the quantum level. Fantastic, Mac said, not bothering to hide his growing irritation. Have you tried talking to them? Talking to them. Dr. Nimbo looked confused. We have their complete medical histories in the database. From talking to them? From their medical records. Mac stopped walking and turned to face both aliens. Let me see if I understand this. You have patients dying of a mysterious disease and you haven't actually talked to them about their symptoms? A third alien appeared, this one shorter and more animated than the others, with large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Oh, you must be the human doctor. I'm Nurse Pipsai. I've read all about human medical practices. Is it true you actually touch patients? Dr. Kethra made a sound that might have been disapproval or possibly indigestion. Nurse Pipsai, please remember that different species have different standards of medical practice. Lower standards, Dr. Nimbo added helpfully. Mac felt his left eye beginning to twitch, which was either a stress response or he was picking up alien habits. Show me to the patients. Now. The walk to the isolation wing was an exercise in controlled frustration. Every few steps, one of the alien doctors would point out another piece of advanced medical technology, each more impressive and apparently more useless than the last. This is our quantum molecular scanner, Dr. Kethra announced proudly. It can detect cellular abnormalities at the subatomic level. Great. What does it tell you about what's wrong with the patients? Well, it shows that their cells are dying. Revolutionary, Mac muttered. When they finally reached the isolation wing, Mac found himself looking through a transparent aluminum barrier at a ward full of patients who looked like they were slowly fading away. Various alien species, all connected to machines that beeped, hummed, and occasionally played what sounded like elevator music. Right, Mac said, heading for the door. Let's go meet them. Wait, Dr. Kethra called out, clearly alarmed. You can't just go in there. Why not? Contamination protocols. You need to be properly sterilized, suited up, and briefed on safety procedures. Mac turned around slowly, his expression suggesting that his patients had just packed its bags and left for vacation. You want me to wear a hazmat suit to talk to patients? It's standard procedure. Your standard procedure is why they're dying. Dr. Nimbo stepped forward nervously. Dr. Sullivan, we followed all established protocols. We've run every test, tried every treatment in our databases. Have you taken their temperature? The silence that followed was so complete that Mac could hear his own heartbeat. Excuse me? Dr. Kethra finally asked. Temperature. You know, are they hot or cold? Running a fever? basic diagnostic technique that's been around for about as long as medicine itself. We have thermal scanners that can detect temperature variations to within 0.001 degrees. Have you used them? Well, no, but the quantum molecular scanner would detect any temperature-related cellular changes. Mac walked over to the nearest patient, a Andorian who looked like he was slowly dissolving from the inside out. Without bothering with protective gear, Mac placed his hand on the patient's forehead. The reaction from the alien medical team was immediate and horrified. Dr. Sullivan. Dr. Keth-Ra practically shrieked. Direct contact is completely against protocol. He's burning up, Mac announced, ignoring the chaos behind him. Classic fever presentation. And you, he said, moving to the next patient, you're cold as ice. Apothermic. Nye. Sir, you need to step away from the patients immediately, Dr. Nimbo was saying, apparently to no one, since Mac was now moving from bed to bed, actually examining patients with his hands. This one's got swollen lymph nodes. This one's showing signs of dehydration. And this poor kid, he said, stopping at a bed containing what appeared to be a young centauri, hasn't been eating. When's the last time anyone asked these people how they feel? Nurse Pipsai raised a tentative appendage. We have their nutritional intake monitored electronically. That's not what I asked. Mac turned to face the group of increasingly distressed alien doctors. You've been so busy scanning and testing and following protocols that you forgot the most basic rule of medicine. Which is? Dr. Keth-Ra asked, though he seemed afraid of the answer. Actually look at your patients. The silence that followed was broken only by the various machines continuing their electronic symphony of monitoring patients that no one was actually paying attention to. So Mac said, rolling up his sleeves, who wants to learn how to practice medicine? The next morning, Mac arrived at the medical facility to find Dr. Nimbo frantically pacing around a holographic display that showed enough data to power a small planet. Dr. Sullivan, Nimbo called out, his voice pitched somewhere between panic and caffeine withdrawal. I've been analyzing the infection patterns all night. The quantum molecular scanner detected 847 different cellular anomalies, but none of them match any known pathogen profiles. Mac poured himself a cup of what passed for coffee in this corner of the galaxy, took a sip, and immediately regretted every decision that had led him to this moment. Nimbo, buddy, you're looking at this all wrong. How can I be looking at it wrong? I've run 17 different analytical algorithms. That's exactly the problem. Mac walked over to a whiteboard that the aliens had apparently installed for his benefit, since no one else seemed to use such primitive technology. You're so busy analyzing data that you're missing the obvious questions. He picked up a marker and wrote who, what, when, where, why across the top of the board. This isn't medicine, it's detective work. Dr. Keth-Ra arrived just in time to see Mac writing on the board like some kind of prehistoric caveman. Dr. Sullivan, we have digital displays that can show data in 47 dimensions. Great. Can they tell me where the first patient got sick? Of course. Colony designation ZX471, Sector 7, timestamp 4.7 standard cycles ago. Not the coordinates, Keth-Ra. Where was he? What was he doing? Who was he with? The alien doctor looked confused. That information wouldn't be medically relevant. Mac turned to stare at him with the expression usually reserved for people who'd just claimed the sky was purple. Everything is medically relevant until you prove it isn't. Over the next several hours, Mac did something that apparently no alien doctor had thought to try. He talked to the patients. Not their medical records, not their quantum scans, but the actual living beings who were dying. So, Kepler, Mac said, sitting next to the bed of an Andromedan trader, who looked like a cross between an octopus and a filing cabinet, tell me about the day you got sick. I was loading cargo at the medical supply depot. Kepler wheezed through his translator. Nothing unusual. Same road I'd run 100 times. What kind of cargo? Medical nanobots. New experimental treatment from Cortex Industries. Mac's pen stopped moving. Medical nanobots? latest generation healing tech, supposed to revolutionize medicine. Though I guess they didn't work out so well for me. Mac spent the next 3 hours talking to every conscious patient, and the pattern that emerged made his blood pressure rise with each conversation. They were all exposed to the same experimental nanobots, he announced to the alien medical team, who had gathered to watch the human work like he was some kind of exotic animal performing tricks. That's impossible, Dr. Nimbo protested. We scanned for nanotechnology contamination. The molecular scanners would have detected any artificial constructs. Would they detect malfunctioning nanobots that were designed to mimic biological cellular activity? The silence that followed was punctuated only by the sound of Dr. Nimbo's translator apparently having a nervous breakdown. The nanobots were supposed to enhance cellular repair, Mac continued, drawing a diagram on his primitive whiteboard. But something went wrong. Instead of helping, they're breaking down cellular structures from the inside. The patients aren't sick, they're being eaten alive by their own medicine. Dr. Keth Ra stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like horror. Are you suggesting that we've been treating victims of medical malpractice? I'm suggesting that you've been trying to cure people of the cure that was supposed to cure them. Nurse Pipsai raised a tentative appendage. How did you figure this out when our scanners couldn't detect anything? Mac turned to look at the young nurse, who seemed to be the only one in the room still capable of asking useful questions. Because I asked the patients what happened to them. Revolutionary concept, I know. But how do we treat it? Dr. Nimbo asked, his panic now reaching levels that required medical attention of their own. Mac walked over to his medical bag and pulled out a device that looked like it had been assembled by someone who'd learned electronics from a cereal box. Controlled electromagnetic pulse generator, he announced. We're going to fry the nanobots. The alien doctors looked at the device with the same expression they might use for a live grenade. That's barbaric, Dr. Keth Ra said. That's effective, Mac corrected. We hit the nanobots with targeted EMP bursts to shut them down, then use chelation therapy to flush the dead tech out of their systems. Chelation therapy? We give them drugs that bind to metal ions and help the body excrete them. It's basic toxicology. Dr. Nimbo was frantically consulting his database. I don't see any references to chelation therapy in our medical literature. That's because you've been so busy developing fancy nanotechnology that you forgot about the basics of dealing with metal poisoning. Mac looked around at the group of alien doctors, who were staring at him like he'd just proposed treating patients with controlled explosions. So, he said, plugging in his EMP generator, who wants to learn how humans handle medical emergencies? The answer, judging by their expressions, was apparently nobody. The emergency medical board meeting was called at 0300 Standard Time, which meant everyone was either exhausted, caffeinated beyond reason, or in Dr. Nimbo's case, both. Absolutely not, declared Dr. Vorthake, the chief medical administrator who had arrived via emergency transport and looked like someone had crossed a bureaucrat with a particularly angry crab. We cannot authorize the use of electromagnetic pulse devices on sentient patients. The liability alone would bankrupt 3-star systems. Max sat at the conference table, his EMP generator beside him like a loyal pet that happened to be capable of causing significant electronic mayhem. The patients are dying, he said with the patience of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow computer. Every hour we spend debating protocol is another hour they're being eaten alive by malfunctioning nanobots. We have procedures for experimental treatments, Dr. Vorthake continued, apparently immune to concepts like urgency or common sense. Forms must be filed, committees must be consulted, and impact assessments must be completed. How long does that take? Standard time frame is 47 standard days. Mac looked around the conference room, taking in the faces of aliens who seemed more concerned with paperwork than people. In 47 days, they'll all be dead. Then we'll have proper documentation of the process. That's when Max stood up, unplugged his EMP generator, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Dr. Keth Ra called out. to save some lives. Novel concept, I know. You can't treat patients without authorization. Mac turned around, his expression suggesting that his patients had not only left the building but had caught the next transport to another galaxy. Watch me. Nurse Pipsai met him at the isolation ward entrance, her large eyes wide with what might have been excitement or terror. Dr. Sullivan. They're sending security to stop you. Good, Mac said, setting up his equipment next to the first patient's bed. I work better under pressure. Is this really going to work? Mac looked at the young nurse, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Pipsai, I'm going to tell you the most important thing about medicine. Sometimes you have to make your best guess and hope you're right. That's terrifying. That's being a doctor. The first EMP pulse was carefully calibrated, targeted, and completely unauthorized. The patient, a Centauri trader named Vex Lawn, immediately showed signs of improvement as the nanobots in his system shut down. It's working, Pipsai whispered, watching the patient's vital signs stabilize for the first time in weeks. One down, Mac said, moving to the next bed, 36 to go. That's when the security team arrived, led by Dr. Vorthay Khan, looking like they'd been called to stop a medical revolution, which in retrospect was probably accurate. Dr. Sullivan, you will cease this unauthorized treatment immediately. Mac looked up from his EMP generator, which was humming quietly as it prepared to save another life. Or what? What? Or we'll have you arrested for practicing medicine without proper credentials. I have credentials. Human credentials don't count. Mac straightened up, and for the first time since arriving at the facility, he looked genuinely angry. You know what doesn't count? Letting people die because you're afraid of paperwork. The Galactic Medical Council has standards. Your standards are killing people. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, except that patient number 2, a young Andromedan who had been barely conscious for weeks, suddenly sat up and asked for water. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dr. Vorthay's translator having what sounded like an electronic seizure. How? Dr. Kethra whispered. By actually treating the disease instead of the symptoms, Mac said, moving to the third patient. Revolutionary concept. Over the next 6 hours, Mac worked his way through the isolation ward with Nurse Pipsai as his assistant and the alien medical team as reluctant observers. Each successful treatment made the bureaucratic arguments seem more ridiculous. Sir, Pipsy said during a brief break, there's something you should know. Cortex Industries has been calling. They want to speak with you. The company that made the nanobots? Yes, they seem concerned about liability issues. Mac looked at the nurse, who had been his only reliable ally in a facility full of alien doctors who seemed more interested in protocol than patients. Pipsai, in your medical opinion, do dying patients care about corporate liability? I don't think so, sir. Then we keep working. By the time Mac had treated the last patient, word had spread throughout the facility that the human doctor had achieved a 100% success rate using what everyone else considered primitive technology and questionable judgment. Dr. Kethra approached Mac as he was packing up his equipment, his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like respect. Dr. Sullivan, I owe you an apology. Ishi. You owe me a drink, Mac corrected. And maybe an explanation of how an entire galaxy of advanced civilizations managed to forget how to practice medicine. We became too reliant on technology. Technology's great, Mac said, shouldering his medical bag. But it's not a substitute for actually giving a damn about your patients. As he walked out of the isolation ward, now filled with recovering patients instead of dying ones, Mac couldn't help but notice that Nurse Pipsai was following him. Where are you going now? She asked. Back to my asteroid, Mac said. Back to miners who appreciate duct tape and whiskey. Can I come with you? Max stopped and looked at the young alien nurse who had been the only one willing to help him save lives when everyone else was worried about forms and procedures. You want to learn primitive human medicine? I want to learn medicine that actually works. Max smiled for the first time since arriving at the facility. Pack your bags, kid. You're about to get the best medical education in the galaxy. 6 months later, Mac was back on Nugget 7, treating the usual collection of mining accidents and industrial mishaps that came with living on a rock floating in space. The only difference was that his clinic now had a waiting list, and most of his patients weren't human. Next, he called out, looking up from a Corellian whose appendage had gotten caught in a plasma drill. To his surprise, Chairman Vextar materialized in the form of a hologram, looking significantly less stressed than the last time they'd spoken. Dr. Sullivan, we meet again. Let me guess, Max said, not bothering to look up from his patient. Another mysterious plague that your advanced medical technology can't handle? Actually, no, I'm here to offer you a position. That got Max's attention. What kind of position? Director of Practical Medicine for the Galactic Medical Council. Your own research facility, unlimited budget, and the authority to reform medical education throughout the galaxy. Mac finished bandaging the Corellian's appendage and sent him on his way with instructions to avoid heavy machinery for a week. Tempting, he said, finally looking at the hologram. But I'll pass. May I ask why? Mac gestured around his small clinic, where a line of patients from 17 different species waited to be treated by a human doctor who used duct tape and common sense. Because I'm already exactly where I need to be. The hologram flickered, and Vextar's expression suggested he'd expected this response. We thought you might say that, so we've prepared an alternative offer. I'm listening. The Galactic Medical Exchange Program. We send our best medical students to study with you, and you train a new generation of doctors in what we're calling Sullivan's method. Mac looked over at Nurse Pipsai, who was currently teaching a group of Andromedan medical students the proper technique for taking a patient's pulse using the radical concept of actually touching them. What's Sullivan's method? Treating patients like they're people instead of data points. Mac had to admit, it had a nice ring to it. 3 years later, the Galactic Medical Journal published a special issue titled The Human Revolution in Medicine, which documented how one stubborn doctor from a backwater asteroid had fundamentally changed how an entire galaxy approached healing. The article described how medical schools throughout known space had begun teaching courses in primitive diagnostic techniques like physical examination, patient interviews, and the apparently revolutionary concept of bedside manner. It noted that emergency response times had improved by 340% since doctors had learned to ask patients what was wrong with them, instead of relying entirely on scanners. It mentioned that patient satisfaction ratings had reached record highs across multiple species, largely due to the novel approach of treating people with dignity and compassion. But perhaps most importantly, it documented how the phrase, "What would Sullivan do?" had become the unofficial motto of a new generation of medical practitioners who understood that technology was only as good as the doctor using it. Mac never read the article. He was too busy running his clinic, which had expanded to include a full medical school, where alien doctors came to learn the ancient human arts of actually listening to patients and occasionally using common sense. Dr. Sullivan called out one of his students, a young Centauri who was learning to suture wounds using actual thread instead of molecular bonding fields. I have a question about diagnostic protocol. Shoot, Mac said, looking up from his latest patient, a vegan trader who'd managed to get herself stuck in her own cargo hold. When the scanner readings contradict what the patient is telling you, which do you trust? Mac smiled, remembering a time when that question would have been considered heretical by the Galactic Medical Establishment. Always trust the patient, he said. Scanners don't feel pain. Scanners don't know what it's like to be scared. Scanners don't care if they live or die. And that makes a difference? Mac looked around his clinic, where aliens from across the galaxy were learning that medicine wasn't about technology or protocols or impressive diagnostic equipment. It was about one living being helping another living being feel better. Kid, he said, that makes all the difference in the universe. Outside, the stars of the galaxy continued their ancient dance, blissfully unaware that somewhere on a small asteroid, a stubborn human doctor was teaching the universe that sometimes the best technology is a pair of hands, a compassionate heart, and the revolutionary idea that patients might actually know something about what's wrong with them. And in medical schools across 17 star systems, a new generation of doctors was learning the most important lesson in medicine. Sometimes the most advanced treatment is simply giving a damn. The legend of Mac Sullivan, the Deathworlder doctor who saved the galaxy by remembering how to be human, was just beginning.